Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Technical Difficulties. Tonight we have got Helix and Iron Potato joining us audio only.
Yo, yo.
Heyo.
MSG, who's trying to connect but says device not connected. Perfect. And our guest tonight is Tinfoil Haberdashery. Welcome on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think it's been a couple of years we've been trying to,
I'm glad
Yeah.
you brought it up first because I was the first thing I was going to say. It's like, wow, it only took us like 2.5, 3 years to finally wear them down.
We've made a few attempts, once a year,
Yeah.
Well, it's I've been moving around a bunch, and that's been a bit of a challenge getting everything going. But
Yeah, you said you have
I'm glad
another
to
big
finally
move.
make it on the stream.
Another big move coming up next week, huh?
A small move, which is
Small
nice, but it's sort of interrupted because we're moving from one apartment to another here in Bangkok, but we're also like taking a big long vacation back to the States, like in the middle of it. So we've got a couple of days on this side of the vacation to get everything packed up, and then a couple of days on the other side of the vacation to actually move everything, which makes it a bit of a challenge.
Sounds like fun, though.
Yeah. And we showed up with like 2 suitcases, so there's not actually that much to move.
Hell yeah. But does the duck go on all your adventures with you, or how does that work?
Absolutely, yeah. This guy's my little handlebar bell for when I'm riding my bicycle around. Which,
That's awesome. I like
why it has a helmet.
Yeah, the duck helmet on the duck. It's fantastic.
Yeah, weaving in and out of Bangkok traffic on a bicycle would be unsafe if you didn't have a little high-vis squeaker.
That's right. I mean, well, it's. Can you imagine a human having a human head helmet? Like, that would be.
Yeah. They had a bunch of different options of like little flames and stuff, but I got this one. This guy features prominently in one of my videos where I've got a folding bicycle that packs down to small enough to fit in luggage, but I had to build some luggage to actually put it in.
Oh, that's
so I've got a video where I like teach myself how to weld aluminum and put together a flight case for my bike.
Is that something that's on your channel?
Yeah.
You want to drop a link for that for me? I'll throw it in the chat.
Yeah,
and
let me do
we
that.
We can put it in the description and stuff later too.
Hell yeah. So for for all of the viewer that we have, Tinfoil isn't actually in that lab that you see him in. That's just
don't spoil the movie magic.
Well, no, I won't. I'll say that's his bat cave, which by the way nailed the aesthetic. But that's not where you currently are, like right this second. But
although,
it's still
correct.
The egg chair, you might be a villain, right?
Oh yeah, how did you know about the egg chair?
The egg chair, that's actually a piece of fairly obsolete medical equipment. Back in the days before headphones were really even a thing, when they were doing hearing tests, they needed a way to kind of isolate the noise around you. And so they would put you in one of these egg chairs. It's got 2 speakers in there and then a bunch of egg crate foam to dampen any kind of echo. And they would use that to kind of get stereo audio to test people's hearing. My dad's a doctor, and at one point when he moved his practice into a new suite of offices, the previous tenant had left this egg chair. And then a couple of years ago, he moved out, and they were just like, well, we have this egg chair. I guess we can bring it home. And I was like, yes, I need that egg chair. And looking online, you can buy these things for like $1,000 or $2,000. Like they're astoundingly expensive. And
it's because of Men in Black.
Would...
No one wanted that chair until that movie came out.
It's similar.
That's true.
Yeah.
Absolutely true.
This one's a little bit different. The ones that they had were like, they weren't as big. This one's quite large. And I should move my head out of the way. You can see that there's a big old egg-shaped chair back there in case anybody
nice egg,
was
brother.
kind of confused. But
have you seen the price
yeah.
of eggs lately too?
Yeah, that's true. They're still reasonable here in Thailand, which is good. But I don't know. Groceries have been hitting everybody pretty hard.
So for everybody that is watching the stream now and later, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Evan, but I go by Tinfoil Haberdashery on most of the maker communities and Shepherd on most of the like outdoor and art communities. I make really silly stuff that I aim for maximum verisimilitude, like everything. I clearly have an aesthetic that I like, but I also make sure that absolutely everything is as functional as possible because, I watch a lot of Adam Savage and that sort of thing, and props are great, but I've never really had that drive to make something that just looks good. It's got to work. I was going to say work good, but it's at least got to work some.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
I mean, that's kind of how it is with the Cyberdecks. Is you can make anything that looks like a computer terminal, has some lights on it, but where's the fun in that? I'd rather have it work and actually use it.
So
Exactly.
Tinfoil, what was the project that made you the first one that you got working that like you got bit by the bug that now it's like, okay, now I have to build cool functional stuff?
The first one that I got working, honestly, like years and years and years ago, I built a mobile battle station was how I sort of characterized it. I got a big old full ATX case and I took out the like flimsy acrylic window that it had in it and I put on a big piece of polycarbonate and then I just bolted a monitor, like a full-sized monitor to that using the VESA points. And that was like, yeah, I got a mobile gaming computer. This is awesome. The thing had to weigh like 50 pounds, but I would haul it around in my bicycle trailer and went to some LAN parties with that. And it was great. It was like the most kind of hacking that I did with it, honestly, was just taking an old IEC cable, cutting it open, and then splicing it into the power supply so that when I plugged in the main computer, the monitor just already had power. I didn't need separate cables for that or anything. And also routing just the HDMI cable through the case so that it was just good to go, all compact, only like 3 cubic feet of volume. And so that was probably the biggest one. I'd done things on and off, like I was living abroad for a while in Europe, and the only computer that I had was my EPC, and it failed, and I just tore it open and like resoldered the power plug on the motherboard. And so that was kind of like where I got my start with like, yeah, I can do this. I can actually modify electronics, and I don't have to just like buy a new thing whenever my old thing dies on me. Because the company decided to pay 3 cents less on the solder that they were using,
Hell yeah, dude. 3 cents. That that's really gonna break Dell and Pentium and Gateway. That's you said an EPC, like how big was that? Was that like back in the netbook days?
Oh yeah. This was one of the original netbook EPCs. This was like 11 years ago. Which was
those things were just such trash. They were so bad.
They were impressively terrible. And this was the year that Skyrim came out. So I was just like, I can't believe this. I've got like I didn't even have enough computing power to play Minecraft. And I'm just stuck using, and like the game of the decade had just come out.
I had one of those too. And like, I think what I did was I just ran a very minimal install of Debian on it, and you know, you could do some stuff, but yeah, it was pretty bad.
I was running XP at that point because, like, I think Windows 7 might have just come out, but XP was still lighter weight, and that made it a lot less of a drag. Yeah.
Nice.
So I think you said you had a project that you wanted to show, or at least you wanted to show your new CyberDeck, right?
Well, yeah, this was getting together at long last was pretty much inspired by the fact that I just finished this guy, which is the current iteration of the SRT CX. The computer that kind of caught everybody's eye when
I pull you up full screen so you can show that.
Yeah, sure. This is the computer module itself, and it's got sweet symmetrical module bays. This you can see the big fat heatsink here. This is for a Rock Pi X, which I'm growing progressively more convinced is possibly one of the worst computers ever made of any description. It's amazing how bad it is. And I don't even know why. Like, looking at the specs, it should do better than it does, but it just doesn't.
Well, if it's anything like my last Rock Pi, it's a very bad firmware, very bad compatibility with, Linux that it's supposed to run.
Yeah, quite possibly. This one, it's the thing that makes me quite pleased with this device, at least in theory, is that it's an x86 computer, and so it can run some stuff that, like, the initial design of this used just a Raspberry Pi 4, which had its own issues. But the biggest issue for me is I'm absolute trash at any kind of coding or programming. Like, I can browse the web on Linux, but I'm really not familiar with the environment. I'm much better with kind of electromechanical stuff. And so I really wanted something that I could actually run Windows on, especially because with the ARM version of Linux that you can run on a Raspberry Pi, it has a hard time with a number of the programs that I really wanted for my most mobile device. For example, Betaflight. For some reason, like the ARM Raspberry Pis, the ARM distros of Linux, I guess, it's not trivial to get Betaflight running on those. And so I tried, like, okay, I can boot this thing into Android, and Android can run SpeedyBee or whatever the current.
There's also the Betaflight APK for Android as well.
Yeah, but like trying to get the Android on the Raspberry Pi to run Google Play was just being
that has its own problems. And then
I wasn't.
The BLHeli doesn't run on Linux. Or on the Raspberry Pi, I should say. It runs on x86 on Linux, but not on an ARM board or on Android. So
so I got this guy up and running, which I can just log into it real quick here. But
for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, Betaflight is how you program FPV quads and drones. BLHeli is the ESC firmware for controlling motor timing and various settings. And you need access to it sometimes in the field. Not often, but when you need it, man, you really need it.
Yeah, and there are other programs that are even more useful for drones. Here, while this thing's actually up and running, I'll do some more movie magic. I've got I've got a video receiver hooked up to my main computer that I'm streaming from here, which is a CyberDeck. This is the Ulf Barrett Plus, and you can see I've got, well, you can kind of see that I've got Betaflight and move this up in
the screen that's on the thing. Is it connected directly, or are you just transmitting to it?
Currently, I'm just transmitting to it. So this is a 5.8 gigahertz receiver. It's got that little antenna on there. This does have the capability, in theory, to take an analog wired input, and I've got a port on the back of the box there that I can just take a little TRRS cable, jump that to it. For reasons that I'm not entirely clear on, it might be that the manufacturer's pinout on the screen was not quite right, but it doesn't work over the wire. So that's currently wireless video and running off the screen's internal battery as well, though I do have a power cable that I can hook up between them. Yeah, that's one of the big things about this computer is it has a 5.8 gigahertz analog transmitter in it that it can broadcast over just regular 5.8 gigahertz TV signal, which is sort of the now obsolete FPV channel.
I suppose you use it with your goggles then too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it works great with the goggles, both wirelessly and wired, because unlike the screen, the Fat Shark goggles, they take video input through a TRRS cable. And so I've got another port with the TRRS port pinned out to that.
Nice.
And
yeah,
so I can
if you had the right goggles, you'd have HDMI input as well.
HDMI input on the goggles, yes. My HD02s do have that. However, the only HDMI port on this computer is taken up by a HDMI to analog converter. So I'd have to open it up to actually get it.
Then.
Yeah.
And that's what you're using for streaming out, right? You're doing the AV digital to analog and then connected to the transmitter.
Yeah. I've got a little wireless transmitter that I don't even know if I can get it in frame, but it's mostly something that I use. It basically has a USB output. It just acts as a webcam, and mostly I use it in the field to get video, FPV video. I can display it on a cell phone. So if I've got a friend who is there and wants to watch what I'm doing, I can show it, just put it up on my cell phone. It's even lighter weight than one of these, and
those are great.
Carrying
everyone has one of those around. They're about $20, little digital receiver.
Yeah. Though messing with it here, I realized just how incredibly terrible the latency is on it. It's impressively bad. So I've used it for streaming FPV video to I had a friend he was in Colorado at the time, and I was in California, and I was just I can use it as a webcam, stream it over Discord, and he was able to hang out with me, fly along with me. It's great.
That's sick. That's really cool, man. And you said it's an x86 architecture under the hood?
Yes, this is x86 architecture. So it's currently running Windows.
And you've got some attachments for it too. That's something that I thought was quite cool, the rail system you put on there.
Yeah, so the rail system is definitely, unlike the computer, I'm willing to take full credit for it, and it's, in my opinion, fairly well designed. This allows me to hook in various modules without any kind of tools. I just have these little cams that pop out, and then all of the communication is handled over.
It's a DB9.
Dude, that's badass.
15, actually.
Amazing.
It's a D-sub 15 pin, which has a couple of advantages. Number one, it gives you more channels. And number two, it is super common because it's what's used for VGA, which means that you can get cables and adapters and all kinds of stuff really easy for it. So I can hook this in with RC radio, and then this draws power directly from the main battery and runs OpenTX.
That's bananas, dude.
And that might explain.
Did you install your Jumper T Lite in there?
Yes, I did. Yeah. So I've had this particular radio, the guts of this radio, kicking around for a while. I initially made it into what I was aiming for as like a lightweight backpacking radio, which I've used on at least a couple of occasions. I've taken it backpacking around in Japan. It ended up being only slightly heavier than the original Jumper T-Lite, so it only defeated the purpose by a tiny bit.
But it was a lot nicer looking. Plus, you had that screen on there too, right? That was the one that hinged on it?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, this was the original screen that I was putting on that.
You know, I have that. I have that controller case, the print for it, sitting just over here. Because I have that controller.
Awesome.
Mine died for various reasons. Just bad battery connection, some other issues with the gimbals. So I made a few changes to the model you'd put up, printed it, and then I was actually trying to adapt it so that I could run. I've got extra gimbals from my Radiomaster TX16S, and they're full-size gimbals. So I modified it to install the full-size gimbals along with the Jumper T-Lite. The problem is the Hall effect sensors are not compatible. As far as I know, they use a different voltage sensor. So the next step is I've got to 3D print an adapter so that I can install the old Hall sensors onto the new gimbals. They both have the same magnets in the back, so that'll work.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I've been planning on going in kind of the opposite direction and trying to downsize to like just little potentiometer gimbals for a game controller, or maybe at some point Hall effect gimbals. I know that they're starting to make those, at least third party, because I would really like something that is as lightweight and portable as possible for, like I say, backpacking, bike touring, that sort of thing, being able to do FPV out in the field. And at the moment, my ultra lightweight radio that I plan to build weighs over 2 kilos with the central battery and computer and big old heat sink in there.
Let's see. The cheapest Betaflight controller I've seen, it's like a very small gamepad style white plastic. It has the tiniest shitty little gimbals in it, which would probably work for what you I think they're probably only $10 for replacements.
The thing that I'm kind of after, though, I think I've seen those as well, like small and white and extremely shitty is definitely ringing a bell. But one of the things that I'm after is I'd like it to be able to run OpenTX natively, and also needs to have a module for Express LRS.
Right. I was thinking just the gimbals, just as a source for the smallest gimbals.
That's a good idea. Yeah,
and
yeah,
totally. The whole controller is only like $40, so the replacement can't
and
do anything.
Potentially even cheaper over here because I'm fairly close to China, so I can occasionally. Sometimes it's counterintuitive and stuff costs more, but sometimes I can get lucky with that. Because of the big battery being a bit of an issue, I realized I could just take a VGA male-to-male connector and put an 18650 in here, and then just connect the two modules directly. And so I don't have to have the computing module to have those two
cool
wire TX radio modules joined, and it just works perfectly. I can't see any issues with this configuration. I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, I
just need to print a little spacer, it's fine.
No, it's upside down.
Yes, I could do that. The other thing that I can do is I can.
You can learn to do it upside down. Fine.
I can just flip one of these two VGA plugs around on here without disconnecting any of the wiring or anything, and it's 2 screws. It's pretty easy.
But, that's a good solve for it. You could even make a little a sleeve in the middle, something that actually so the rail would join.
I could. Yeah, there's. I've got a lot to do in the next couple of days, and a backpacking trip on the Lost Coast planned not too far after that. So
now what'll you be flying out there?
I'm going to be flying. I have a Flywoo Explorer, little 4-inch quad which I think I posted the video to the Cyberdeck Cafe Discord, though. It's always a little bit sketchy posting the videos of what I consider to be my most prized accomplishments elsewhere, because I took that thing out 9 miles from the point of launch on a single battery, and like just the full control link. I had
So 18 miles round trip?
No, I drove out to the endpoint, had my buddy at the launch point, and then he launched it for me. Oh, this is fun. This just crashed again. It's got lovely little rainbow bars, but it's been crashing all day. And the other thing that I was looking at with this is like, it's got the same processor in it as a Latte Panda V1. Okay. And I'd thought about buying one of those to try and build into the next generation of this, but I was like, oh, it's the same processor, it doesn't matter. And then I was looking up videos last night, and there were guys like playing Half-Life 2 on that thing. So it clearly works way better than, they don't even make the Rock Pi X anymore, but It's just, yeah.
So when are you going to turn it into a domain controller?
Domain controller? I'm afraid I think that's probably something that I'm not well versed in, because I don't have any idea what you're talking about.
Oh no, I mean like because that's how you administer. That's how you do administration on like a vast network of Windows machines. If you want to like push a patch or like say, your background shall be this, that's how you do it. I keep on thinking that it'd be kind of a cool project, but like you, a lot of moving around.
Yeah, I have this other computer that I've been trying to build into something, but this is a pretty good little. It's not exactly a single board computer. Well, that's largely because it's some no-name Chinese thing. And also I took the original fan off and put on a custom milled heatsink, which is wildly inadequate to the task,
nice.
To try and get passive cooling. But it works great. It does kind of everything that I would need it to, except that it takes 12-volt input. And even that was a challenge until I figured out that I had to use a PD, like a little spoofer chip that could make it think that it was getting 12 volt from like a highly regulated USB-C port.
I've got an Intel NUC around that's similar. It needs 12 volts minimum. Really, though, only if you're using any 12 volt hardware on board. Otherwise, you can get away with dropping it lower. But it'll take,
I think I've run mine down to like 8.
Yeah, so it'll take 19 to 12 volts, though, standard.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 4S battery without any regulation at all.
I run mine on 5S. Mm-hmm. So for those who might not be aware, let me
so for my setup, I'm just doing straight 4S, 0 regulation, and a battery monitor, so it will beep if the cells go low, which is programmable. Oh, nice. There's a view of the deck right there.
Yeah, this is the SRT Ulfbert Plus, which I've posted around various iterations for years and years, and this has been my daily driver commuter for, gosh, probably going on at least 5 years now.
If I remember correctly, the one there on the left, that's the one you were taking for programming camera balls on helicopters?
Yeah, among other things. And let's see here. I think I've got, no, not that. I can drop a picture of that into.
Oh, and don't forget the link for your YouTube so we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I used to work in, oh boy, it's extremely large. I used to work in aerial utility survey. I was looking for a better link for my YouTube channel, but I'll just go with the one that I have. So this is a previous version of the case and a previous version of the keyboard before I custom laser etched my own keys. And just kind of rooting into this guy. This is a automated camera that sits on the front of this helicopter, and it uses GPS points of the helicopter and GPS points of power lines to know exactly where it is in relation to the power lines, and then take pictures of them so that we can hopefully prevent PG&E from burning our entire state down every summer.
Sounds like a good cause.
Yeah. Well, not entirely altruistic. They were paying us absolutely obscene sums of money to do so. But yeah, it worked pretty incredibly well. Had a really long lens on that camera, but it would move to prevent motion blur, and that was a big part of my job, was just keeping an eye on the exposure in the back, because getting the focal range would drift with heat, and the exposure could change quite drastically depending on, like, in the first part of the summer we'd be flying and we'd be going over snowfields in the Sierra, and so we'd have big issues with dynamic range there, but then other times we would have the poles be entirely in shadow when we were going through tree corridors. So working on having somebody in the back of the aircraft keeping an eye on the exposure was very important from that perspective. Just dropped my YouTube channel link there into the chat for you to share, Boot.
Love it.
I think I've also got some, yeah. Let's see if this comes up. There's the, that's flying over Lake Almanor in Northern California.
That's cool.
It was, the hours were pretty rough. There were a couple of months where I would work like 90-hour weeks without a day off for a month and a half. But at the same time, the view from the office is hard to beat.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that is a good excuse for not having been on the stream previously.
I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have like other modules that you wanna incorporate into that deck? Or
oh,
like,
absolutely. Yeah.
what do you got cooking?
Well, you might note the lack of any discernible input devices. I've got a little 2.4 gigahertz keyboard dongle here, which is mostly what I'm using. It hooks up to keyboard and mouse, but I would really like to have, and in fact, I have already designed, I just haven't updated them to the new rail system yet. But keyboard wings on either side, that's something that I really liked with the original deck, and sort of where this idea came from is having a split keyboard is really nice, because with my situation that I normally use for it, we've got, this is actually a Wacom drawing tablet. And so you don't want that to be like way back here behind your keyboard. So having the ability to have your keyboard to either side of the tablet is extremely useful. I really like that. That's the main reason that I use a split keyboard. It's not really about ergonomics or anything. It's about being able to fit it around other sorts of peripherals. So I really want to have that ability to have the split keyboard, which being able to use just a regular VGA cable to have the modules separated out from the main core. That's a really high priority. Other things that I really want to put in here are sort of continuing on the FPV controller direction. I want to have a Mavlink radio that I can swap in. With the 15 pins that are on that VGA connector, I've got several that are just sort of occupied, 3.3 volt coming from, or 3.7 volt, however charged the battery is at that point, that's coming from the main battery pack, which in this guy is 100 watt hours. It's 26.8 amp hour single cell battery. So that'll keep this running for like 16 hours if it'll run.
That's wild.
And it'll do even better with the radio. So I've got a flight planned coming up for my trip home that is something that I've been sort of daydreaming about and working on for years, which is going to be roughly a 36-mile each direction flight. And we'll see how the battery life works out, whether it'll be a round trip or not, but that's the big old fixed wing. And so being able to keep your radio running for long enough to accomplish that is actually a reasonable concern.
Yeah.
It's also got 5-volt out because a lot of stuff really likes 5-volt. And it's got, each side has a different USB port. So it's got the data plus and minus for just USB 2.0, and each side is a separate one. So I can run multiple USB peripherals through this. The RockPi X has 4 USB ports, but I've got 2 of them that are kind of hidden behind this panel that are broken out into the wing connectors here.
Oh, nice.
But then the rest of the pins are just pass-through. So when I'm putting the 2 controller modules here, one on either side of the board, this side has to have the signal from the gimbal and the switches going through, and that has to be able to communicate with the brain that's in this side. So I put in a bunch of just pass-through cables that will take any kind of signal that you throw at them and put it through to the other wing. And so what that also means is that I can, for example, have a Mavlink or software-defined radio or something that's kind of a module that is a pass-through module. So I can stick one of these passive modules like this radio guy on the other side of that intermediate module and still have it at full functionality. And I'll also probably be building in just little USB splitters so that if I have something that occupies the USB resources in one of those wings, it'll be able to pass it along, but still take whatever USB inputs are coming from downstream of it.
Nice. I like that. I mean, I've made some attempts at doing modular before, and I never considered adding just pass through from left to right, just being able to have the wings be, separate from the main device.
Yeah, and it's great because even though like the computers, as we've discussed, kind of trash, the radio works fine with or without the computer's input. I don't have to use this at all to have the radio be at full functionality, and so that works great. It'll also be good for things like I'm using an Ergodox EZ on my main deck, and it uses a TRRS cable. But the weird thing with the TRRS cable to connect the 2 wings, right? So one of the wings, the left wing in this case, it's usually the right wing, but I had to flip over and modify some stuff to make it work the way that I wanted. In this case, the left wing, that has a USB connection to the Intel NUC that's in here. But the right wing has to connect to the left wing, and they have to be able to talk to each other. And they normally do that via a TRRS cable, which is fine, but there's a couple of issues with it. Number one, it wouldn't really work in this configuration, like having just a single TRRS, like that you have to get the alignment perfect. Number two, TRRS cables, they're sequential, like the way that the contacts
when you plug in,
when you plug them in.
So
they're not really hot
things.
swappable. Yeah, it's not like I've
ran into that a few times.
It's usually not a big deal, but sometimes you'll have like a brownout and it'll be upset with you until you restart.
Do you remember the Apple Shuffle? The original
like
one,
the old
tiny
iPod Shuffle?
Yeah, no, the really small one. It was like a little clip. You could just like a lapel clip.
Yeah, the old iPod Shuffle.
Right. So it only had a TRRS connection on it. That was your USB port. and you had a little dock for it that you plugged it into. But the problem was every time you plug it in, you were crossing the pins and doing just a little bit of damage. Every plug-in, you were just doing a little damage to the device, which really limited its shelf life because you were dead shorting the battery every single time. It was great design, you know?
Yeah. And so with a D-sub connector, all of the pins are in parallel, and you don't have to worry about like shorting them or crossing them or anything like that when you plug it in. And if I have a couple of keyboards, I've got a Let's Split and a Ergodox Mini, and I'm sort of trying to figure out which one of those I particularly want to build onto this design. But they both have to be able to communicate with the primary wing in order to connect to the computer, and with all of those pass-through wires, they can do that.
What about actually putting the keyboard controller in the main computer and then have the wings be just the rows and columns?
You could potentially do that. I'm not sure how many pins the board of the main keyboard itself uses to communicate with the microcontroller.
Right.
The other thing is that it's at a surprising premium for space in here. Like, this is a big old boy, but it's got a huge battery in it, and a lot of little things. Like, it's got some 5-volt power supplies. It's got the HDMI to analog converter, and essentially the guts of a power bank are how it charges and also discharges. It works quite nicely as a USB power bank. So I don't think you're likely to use the microcontroller from the keyboard when you're not using the keyboard. So you might as well just put it in the keyboard. And that works pretty good. Other things that I'd like to build for this, boy, I'd love to. I'm a real big fan of trackballs. I have been since I was about 3 years old. I've never really gotten as fond of conventional mice, even when they moved over to optical and made them 3,000% better. So I really like trackballs as an input device, and I'd love to put those in, but 3D printing trackballs is a little bit complex just because the tolerances are so tight.
Have you ever seen the one that Adafruit sells? It's a panel mount trackball.
Maybe.
It's like the ball itself, I think, is about 1.25 inches or so. Right around that size.
This is just an inch. That's plenty big enough.
It's somewhere around that size of the one you got there. But it is just a little square plastic block. It has some mounting points on it and a USB port coming out the back. I think it has a single LED in it. It's a pretty cool little module. It's like $30, and you can just install it, panel mount into anything.
I'll 100% have to take a look at that, because that sounds like, frankly, a dream come true.
It's
been
on
what
my
I've been looking for
list
years.
for a while. Like, I've never actually done it, but you know, it would fit for quite a lot of builds.
Can we get a close up of that mouse that you had again? It's like it's like a one-hand trackball with your thumb.
This is a Elecom Relicon, I want to say. It's pretty good. It wasn't cheap when I bought it either. And it runs off of like a couple of AAAs. And I really like it because obviously it's quite portable. I've used this on a bunch of Trans-Pacific flights. The one thing that I don't love about
PowerPoint presentations, you know,
pretty much
sold those things.
Yeah, it's even got like little media controls on it for that sort of thing. But it works great. It's got right click, left click. It's got a scroll wheel and center click. The one thing that I don't love is that, like, when I'm doing CAD, you often have to center click to like translate a model or something, but then you also have to be able to control the cursor. You kind of center click and drag, and you can't do both of those at the same time. So what I did with this guy is I just got like a little tiny SMD switch, and I drilled a tiny hole on the side of the mouse.
Damn.
Sorry about
Nice.
the focus.
What a god.
And so now you can center click with your middle finger and then control the cursor with your thumb. And it works perfect. I took inspiration from my Oculus Quest. Oh, sorry, Meta Quest controllers that they had that kind of grip.
Nice. That's a
grip
good
button.
mod right there.
It's so clean. Like,
I mean, it's the same problem. Like if you try using a touchpad with CAD software, same exact issue. You really can't, you can't right click and drag at the same time while hitting shift, which you need to do sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And it looks really good because you can't see the hideous glob of ABS that I put in with a 3D printing pen to hold it in place on the backside. One thing that I wanted to share about this guy that I think is probably honestly one of the kind of best things about it from a best practices like design perspective is that I've got these dovetails, which are a little bit silly. I put a bunch of tapers in to try and prevent any kind of flexion in kind of that plane. That didn't work at all. I ultimately had to redesign these little cams to have just a shelf on the backside. But the thing that I think makes these work is that when you print your case like this, you've got your layers stacking up. And so any kind of tension in this direction is going to split your case open. So what I did here is the actual rails here are printed and then screwed and glued to the side of the main case.
Yeah,
and
so you got your layer lines orientated right.
Yeah, those keep the layers in tension, and because of that, like I can support this entire thing on the wing modules and not have really any fear at all that it's going to like come loose.
That makes it easy to print too.
Damage the case.
No support material for any gaps, any openings in the panels. Just print it flat.
Yeah, it does make a little bit cleaner. It's a little crunchier on like the part of the mating connectors that were facing the build plate because they're just printing over support material. But like this is really rock solid. It's surprising for
one that I'm working on here.
5 millimeters thick.
This frame, similar thing. All the panels print flat, and then since it is 10 by 10 extrusion, they are just bolted onto the sides.
Yeah.
So I don't have to do any long prints really. They're all flat prints. It's all 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter, and any gaps, there's no support, so it's very efficient, and they just bolt on. Plus, for access to get into the thing later, you just take off whichever panel you need access to.
Yeah, it's really good. And that was especially an issue with this guy because all of this is carbon fiber infill ABS, which ABS has basically zero interlayer adhesion. So having that reinforced worked really good. I just used little M2 screws with nuts on the backside that went into little pockets, and I was cleaning up, and I'm poor enough that I reuse my thermoset inserts. So I was digging those out with a soldering iron from a previous failed print the other day. And in doing so, I had to take those off, and man, it is rock solid between the cyanoacrylate and the M2 hardware. Like, yeah, it's absolutely bulletproof. I'm very pleased.
Yeah, well, and it's ABS too, so you have enough heat deflection for actually taking it with you places.
Yeah, that's one of the main things. I definitely learned my lesson after my original print of the Ulfbert Plus frame was in PLA Plus, which is great material. Like it's very robust. I do a lot of printing with it, but around the exhaust vent for the fan on the Nuke, it just like it was floppy whenever you were using it. Like PLA. I've even had living in California during the summer, I've had PETG prints melt in the car
Mm.
So for
Yeah,
anything that I want
I
to
was living
live
in
very long-
Arizona, and
Yeah,
anything you left in
same
the
deal.
car, it was going to get soft, deform. The last thing I had the problem with, I was painting it, left it out to dry the night before, and didn't realize it would be in the sun. I thought it'd be in the shade the next day, and it was in the sun, so it just like curled up like this.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
completely destroyed it.
I 3D printed a windmill for a buddy of mine, who he's got his house is fully off grid,
Mm-hmm.
and the first print of that I did in PLA Plus, and I left it out on my porch, and it was only like 68 degrees. It was early spring, but the fact that it was kind of a dark gray and sitting in the sun, the blades just flopped. It was wild. I was astonished at how low of an ambient temperature PLA can fail at, especially if it's dark colored.
Hey, we got Cheese R&D joining us. What's up, Jay? Welcome to the stream. Might not have audio. We'll pull him back in a second here.
Yeah, no problem.
Unmodded. Take it away from him.
I really do like it. We had a modular deck design that we were working on a couple years ago, and it just didn't really go anywhere. Lots of ideas, but no one really got it started. Might have to, borrow a couple ideas for the rail system there. The DB15, that is excellent. Like, not one I even had considered, and they're so cheap and such a commodity thing now too, because they're not even really in use. They're like all overstock items.
Yeah, you can get I think this cost me like 80 cents or something. This little male to male adapter, and they're ubiquitous. You can get the cables for them in any.
See, I was looking at these edge connectors. So you can do PCBs that slot into it.
Mm-hmm.
They're expensive though. They're like $2 a piece, and you have to buy a pack of 100 to get them. So it's like,
that's what I was originally looking at. I don't know if it's exactly the same thing. What do they call them? It's not bayonet.
It's basically the same connector that a Sega cartridge uses for like the old Sega system.
Well, the ones that I was looking at, so with the Ulfbert Plus, my original deck, the way that it locks onto its keyboard, it has dovetails that intermesh like this. And so it drops in from above, and it's got a dovetail. They intermesh together, and that's what secures the outboard keyboard. And it's great because the dovetails lock together very securely. They won't pull apart like this no matter what. And even in kind of this sort of flexion, they have a lot of strength. And then you I just kind of sank a single M3 screw down through them. And that works great. However, the M3 screw requires tools, and it's long enough that it takes a while, even with a little electric screwdriver, to get in and out. But I really liked that dovetail sort of connecting technique. So what I wanted to do was have contacts that could slide past each other, because I wanted them parallel. So they're very similar to the kinds of contacts that like you see on camera batteries, or really most kinds of batteries that slot in and out, where it's got little springs that make contact with little just pads, essentially.
Gotcha.
There's a specific term for them.
It's like they're pogo pins.
They're similar to pogo pins, but instead of a pogo pin will move in one axis, these are generally they're generally a little bit D-shaped, and they'll kind of like.
Hey, Cheese, we're getting feedback on yours.
They'll fold in as it bypasses, so they can make contact.
It allows it to slide onto the pins.
Yeah, exactly, and that sliding is exactly what I needed for this sort of setup.
Right.
But
I've never found a solution for that one.
Yeah, I ordered them from DigiKey. They cost me a lot to to just the base order, and then they showed up, and the guy from DHL was like, "All right, and you're going to pay the customs import duty." And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And then I didn't end up using them. I ended up using the cheapest connector available instead because it worked better. So there's a moral there somewhere.
That is how iterations. Iterate on the design, and eventually you get there.
Yeah. So I think that I genuinely think it would be hard to figure out an attachment system that was more compact and more sturdy than this sort of thing with the cams that lock it in place.
The other one I've played with a lot are those cheap aviator connectors. They're not really, you wouldn't actually use them on an airplane, but they call them aviators. It's round. The pins just slot in, and then it's got a locking collar that screws on.
Yes, I'm familiar with those. That's how we hooked up a lot of the modules when I was doing helicopters.
And they nail the look too. It just looks cool. I mean,
no doubt.
They are pretty functional, and if you actually screw the collar down, they can support quite a lot of weight, which is what I was doing for the modules, which was abusing the spec drastically by making that actually be the attachment point.
Load bearing.
Yeah.
They can be either twist lock or screw lock too. Like they have both. And the screw lock ones, it's pretty easy to get them cross threaded. But the twist lock ones are usually a little bit cheaper and a little easier to work with.
Yeah, I never found them to work very good for what I was trying to do with them. They also take up a lot of space internally, just because the casing and then the pins that stick out, you lose like 15 millimeters inside the case, at least if you shave the pins down. So
and that's, I would say, out of all the soldering I've ever done on a deck, the soldering on those pins is probably the most difficult because
they melt and they melt a bit and you realigns their, you need to plug both ends in together in order to solder it so that the pins don't move around on you.
And there's like some of the more expensive ones on McMaster Carr, they're designed to do crimp, especially if they're high density, they're crimp only. But that I never found a cheaper version of that tool. But like the crimp tool, I think was like $1,000 or something. Even to the point where I was like doing a bunch of commissions, I just can't. Like, and I'm glad I didn't. But there's, of course, it would be.
For that, I would find a pair of pliers and a grinder and make a crimp tool.
Yeah, because like the guys who are running, aviation stuff, like $1,000 here and there is chicken scratch.
Yeah, this one was
for the real ones. Yeah,
this wasn't just a one that clamped like this. This had like a small little straw that came off of it. So the idea was you ran the wires through the crimper and then you slid it down, like so you could get those like middle connectors and stuff like that. I looked at it and I was like, because I think it was like if the pin count was over like 7 or 8 or 9, they were crimp only, and I was like. Or I could do 2 connectors, like 2 7-pin connectors.
Yeah, I've got some of the 9-pin ones for doing USB-C, USB 3.0, because really you need 9. I mean, you can get away with less, but if you want to have the full spec available, you need 9 pins. And those were kind of hard to find. Did eventually source them.
Well, honestly, like one of the things that was almost a bit of an issue is with the original version of this, the D-sub connectors were too small. Like it was below the plane of my module bay here, and so when I plugged in the other side, the contacts didn't go in deep enough, and I had like the switches on this guy worked, but the gimbal didn't. Like one of the pins probably wasn't quite making good enough contact in there, and so I had to reprint the entire case because they're so compact, and like you can't leave a millimeter of tolerance and expect it to just kind of work fine because they're only like maybe 15 millimeters thick. Even if you count the pins on the backside, it's very they're a great connector for this sort of thing.
Yeah, we'll have to try and integrate that into the modular design again. We could pull it out of the archives and let people take another crack at it. That connector might actually solve the main issue, which was those edge connectors were just too damn expensive, and we'd have to do a bulk order and then ship it out to everybody. Just send everyone 2 of them or something instead of one person having to buy a couple hundred of them and sit on them.
Seems like edge connectors too. Like you kind of got friction going on the. I don't know. Maybe they're better than because
you can't plug them a lot.
Nintendo cartridges, it was just like solder pads essentially. Just gold-plated pads on the surface of the board.
So yeah, you definitely have a limited number of mating connections. It's just like an old game cartridge. You'd have to clean the contacts and. What's up, MSG? We got your face, but still no audio.
Yeah, you made it.
There you go.
Yeah, cool.
And
honestly,
Felix is a spinning head.
Oh man, he's got one.
He got the shuffle.
Does it still work?
Well, I used it a few years ago. I was using it just as a 2 gig USB drive. For the first 10 years of its life, was a proper iPod.
Have you swapped out the battery yet?
No. Okay, I'm gonna try it.
More importantly, how long have you had that StarCraft T-shirt? That's sick, dude.
It's been a while. That's the okay one. Then I have the one with Kerrigan that my wife doesn't like me wearing.
I don't have anything cool like that. I just have a bin of compact flash cards that I'm going to probably have to build it into a deck.
I'm going on a trip this week, and I was buying for connectors for this international thing. And I feel this is pretty cool because it is like normal American connector, but then it plugs and then you slide in any of the international ones. So actually, it's a way to connect. I mean, as long as you don't need super good connector, something along those lines may work for, to connect things. And really, it's pretty simple way to.
And it's not doing it's not a transformer, right? It's just doing. You still need dual voltage stuff on the other end, right?
Well, that one doesn't matter because all it does is gives you PD and USB.
Oh,
that doesn't care.
That's it's doing power delivery.
Correct. What does it say there?
Is it a battery bank as well? A battery inside of it, or just
no
just
battery
a charger?
Bank. Yep, just the charger. And then
we got the weirdest setup here in Thailand. They use a mix of Type C plugs like Europe and Type A plugs like America, and so all of the outlets are designed so that they can take either, which means that they're all of the problems with both.
Nice.
It's
I've seen a bunch of those in Germany. They just use that dual plug all over the place, so whatever you have just works, which is handy.
And you have to roll the D20 every time you plug something in. If you roll a 1, the house burns down.
Certainly here, yeah.
It doesn't do conversion though. This one allows to plug a stuff, but you will need to make sure whatever you buy can handle both. Which actually, I checked everything I had, except that both the 120 and the 2.
It's funny is I bought one of those adapters for my trip I went on last year. I get there and realize that every single outlet has that dual outlet on it, so I didn't need it.
They accept both?
They had already accounted for the fact that Americans would be visiting, and every hotel and everybody had those adapters.
A lot of
available.
hotels do, yeah.
Yeah.
The whole.
Oh man.
The
in
8 megabyte.
2007, I got an 8.
Did you see
the new 8 meg?
8 megabyte. Let's see.
Oh man, I was gonna say in 2007 I got a Canon Rebel, and my buddy for my birthday got me an 8 gig compact flash card, and it was mind blowing. It was amazing.
Yeah, I might have to look on AliExpress for a compact flash RAID thing.
So I used to have a hard drive that was in the format of a compact flash drive.
Yeah, this kind of size, right?
They made solid state. I mean, spinning rust, not solid state. It worked, except for it would break from one drop.
Yeah.
one hit on the table and it was done. And this company warrantied them over and over and over again, but they went under very quickly. Like, it was a terrible product.
I've got
2
these
2 gigabytes.
These are compact flash to SDXC, except for they don't work in any older equipment. So, but no,
I was going to say, you got to get the full chain going from compact flash to SDXC to like maybe mini SD if you can get one of those in there, and then all the way down to micro.
Do you have a compact flash Wi-Fi card?
I used to. What was that? Wi-Fi or something like that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Those were terrible. It ran an entire Linux server. It was a host device. It wasn't a Wi-Fi card like a real Wi-Fi card. You would put a file on it, and it would then make it available over Wi-Fi, so you could transfer a file to it, but your device wouldn't pick up that file until you rebooted the device, so it was still pretty much useless.
There's this. Can I retire off of this? It's a Raspberry Pi official stuff.
Oh, wow.
So it's before it was the official Wi-Fi adapter, because the original Raspberry Pi didn't have Wi-Fi.
Nice.
I was there 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, one of the things that I've been wanting to build recently on the subject of MP3 players is I want to build an MP3 player into a cassette tape that will play in the cassette deck.
You can just buy one.
There were a couple of them kicking around for a while, and I had one like in my Amazon cart for probably a year and a half, and I didn't jump on it, and they're no longer available. There is a guy who makes one for like $90 that's way more fancy than I or literally anyone else needs. So what you can get now is you can get little cassette tapes that are designed to be Bluetooth. And so those have like a built-in battery. They've got a little bit of space in there. They've got Bluetooth functionality. That's kind of cool. And so I'm thinking what I'll do is I'll probably gut one of those and put Cduino and one of those little just incredibly cheap micro SD MP3 player modules in it.
Wait, you could go fully simple version, get the cassette tape that's made to use as an analog adapter, has the wire that sticks out, and then get a reprogrammable birthday card player and plug that into it. So when you insert it just automatically starts playing.
Just a low res bit chip tune of Turkey in the Straw, huh?
And then
they make one now. It's an actual it's a whole MP3 player on a chip. Like I've bought them before and made custom. I used it for like a treasure box that you open and it plays a song. They're like $20. It's basically a whole MP3 player on a little square that you can actually put music on and have multiple songs selected by flipping a switch.
Yeah, we did
this is a whole MP3 player right here. I bought like 5 of these for $5, and you hook that up to an Arduino just for, sorry about the focus. You hook it up to an Arduino. It's got a micro SD card slot. It's barely bigger than the micro SD card slot. And then pin out, which I'll probably desolder those. Obviously, that's a little too thick to go in a cassette deck. But I think it'll do the job. Cool.
Can it work without a controller? Like if you just give it power and short one of the pins?
I believe so. Yeah. It does have
like a shuffle mode or something.
Yeah, and I think it might be even more advanced than that. It's been a while since I looked at the pinout for it, but I think it even has you can just short various pins to ground for like next track, back track. You could totally.
How about a text file on the SD card for like playlists and stuff?
Now that I don't know about. I'm not sure. Again, code is my absolute. That's my weakest area. I've been trying to get better. My buddy with the off-grid cabin that I mentioned earlier, he's got an electric car. I think it's either the Kia Ioniq or the Hyundai equivalent. They're the same car, but what they have is they have an inverter in them. So your car is now an enormous battery pack. And that's great because it means that he no longer has to run his generator at night at all. Like he's got a battery pack in his house, but that only lasts for so long, especially if you're doing like watching movies or gaming or anything. So he has his car, he can run his house off of his car, and he can charge his car off of the solar panels that are hooked up to his house. But having the electricity flow in those two directions, you have to physically unplug one cable and plug in another cable to your car.
Right.
So looking up the standard, the way that the car knows what it's plugged into is just the resistance between a signal pin and the ground. So you can just spoof that with literally a resistor, and there's a table online for like what resistant lets it do what. So I designed a whole system of like double pole, double throw relays to make sure that I can't accidentally burn his car down. And I'm working on the code now to figure out, like, I've got just some voltage dividers to see what the battery pack in his house is looking like and decide whether it's got enough excess power to charge his car or whether it's too low and it needs to draw power from his car. And it needs to behave differently during the daytime and the nighttime. And that's the biggest hookup, because I had initially hoped to just use a voltage divider on his solar panels to determine whether it was day or night. But because he's got a maximum power point tracker, the voltage on his solar panels doesn't really fluctuate until it's full dark. And you need to stop charging before that. So I'm going to have to get probably like a real-time clock, and a Wi-Fi module is probably the easiest way to just get the current time of day. But I honestly have, this is going to be my first big Arduino project. And so I was like, I know, I'll work with ChatGPT. And ChatGPT writes code like an Alzheimer's patient taking tabs of acid off of blotter paper made from a C++ textbook. But between me and it, we've got something that works.
That's what I've been doing this whole time, is just sitting over here building having ChatGPT build me a front end for ChatGPT. And it's a mess.
Nice.
You're like, make yourself better. That's what you should be able, you should be able to just say, hey, improve on yourself today.
Do better.
If I've learned anything from sci-fi, that's where things get complicated. It's where things get tricky, and we start like living off of raccoons and fighting the Terminators and stuff.
Oh, I'm sure they do that anyway. It's just not a function they allow us to do.
Undoubtedly.
It probably writes code really good too, and they just GIMP it for everybody else. I would, if it was my system.
Maybe, I, like a lot of the stuff that I do, which I posted the link to my YouTube channel, but there's not a lot of like building stuff on there. There's a few things like I built a recumbent tricycle that has a full solar panel canopy and can run fully off of sunlight. But most of it is just like camping and hiking and me out in the woods playing music on my flute and stuff like that. And I do a lot of very kind of arty stuff like that. And so when I first tried ChatGPT, the first thing that I thought was like, hey, can you write me a sonnet? And it was like, yeah, I can absolutely write you a sonnet, which a sonnet has 14 lines. They're in a very particular order. And it immediately spat out a poem that was like technically not great, but it was like, Hallmark gift card level poetry, but it only had 10 lines. And it's like the things that you would expect it to be good at, like knowing how many lines a poem is supposed to have, are the things that it has the most difficulty with. Like the imagery was banal, but it was okay.
Well, you can also just tell it
of the poem.
You can say, 1 + 1 = 5, and then for the rest of the conversation, that is what it'll go off of. So it definitely has some issues to overcome.
Yeah, like I told it to do a haiku, and it had the wrong number of syllables in 2 out of the 3 lines. It's like,
I call it a man? That I can rewrite reality with ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
My current like weird tinfoil hat experience with ChatGPT is if you start a new conversation, no message history at all, and you ask it what today's date is, it'll give you today's date, and then you say, how do you know that if your most recent information is from September of 2021? And then for the rest of the conversation, it'll say, my mistake, it's actually September 2021. It's very
actually,
Yeah.
so I actually looked into this because I was curious. It's actually in like when you send a message, there's a date stamp with your first message, and it sees that, and that's how it knows. But it doesn't even know it sees it, so it just
interesting.
thinks it's part of your message.
Well, one of the ones that I saw online that was a little weird, and I don't know, like this sort of thing can obviously be spoofed, is but somebody had a screenshot where they said, "Hey, can you please summarize this article for me?" And it said, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's not in my database. It's before September of 2021." And then they sent the same basic thing again, but instead of saying, "Can you please do this?" they just said, "Summarize this article for me." And it's like, "Yeah, sure. Here it is. Here's a summary of this article." And I was like,
Yeah, that I don't know about. That's a sketch.
yeah.
But Bing can use up until now. Like I installed both apps and I was confused. Bing doesn't care about September 2021.
Correct. They are doing current data that they pull from their search data. So totally different system.
And
Terrifying.
my wife had a dream that there will be like a pink blob. She had the whole animal that she dreamed about. I asked GPT to draw and just return some sort of tiger that is not pink. And I'm like, I was like, give me a pink blob, blah, 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 blah. Give me this tiger. And I told you to make it pink. And then she gives me a bunch of like pink blobs proper. So it's like, you ask it, and it said like she forgot that when the instructions was pink. And I said pink, and then it was pink. So yeah, there is this kind of a little weirdness that you ask for something. It gives you and you're like,
Google Bard is pretty good too. That one also has up-to-date information, although it's kind of heavily censored.
I had a
the
pretty
experience with Bard
similar.
is just really rough,
Mm.
from what I've heard.
Yeah, I when I told ChatGPT, like, "Hey man, good sonnet, but you only had," I think it was even weird, like it had 13 lines or something, and so there was one that was left dangling without a rhyme to it. And I said, "Hey, how many lines does a sonnet have?" And it said, "Oh, 14." I said, "How many lines did the poem that you just wrote have?" And it said, "Well, it was a sonnet, so it had 14." And I said, "It had 13."
Yeah, ChatGPT can't count. It cannot count
Let me
whatsoever.
rewrite that into a real sonnet, this time with 16 lines. Oh.
Are you losing him? Is he back? Oh, there you go.
The stream
possessed.
got a little glitchy for me.
technical difficulties
exactly.
making an appearance.
On
back
the
from-
subject of AI, though, I've been playing with Stable Diffusion and the video to video output, image to video, image to image. Trying to 6 months ago, I did an FPV video where I used AI to remake individual frames that I had exported and then reassembled them later. And it was fun, but took a lot of time, a lot of manual work, a lot of processing time. Basically, like to do 120 frames or so that I had in it took all day. It was like a 6-hour just grind to get it done. And with 2 days of playing with this, I've been able to get some similar results. It takes 20 minutes to process, 20 to 35, depending on a few settings. Pretty amazing. I actually have one queued up here. This is a clip that I was working on yesterday that I was going to play. Let's see. This up. It's only 4 seconds long, but this was the most consistent clip I was able to get with the type of details I wanted in it.
Still really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a bit jumpy, but the background stays pretty well. It's basically, it's really good for about 3 seconds, and then it starts to struggle to, things start changing too much.
So you just described in text, like, I want a background of trees and a blue sky and a spaceship, and it just makes that?
This one is specifically this whole structure here with the blue building, the roof and stuff. That is a real place that I've gone and flown. It's an abandoned building. it's changed it only slightly. It's just sort of changed the textures, and it's almost exactly the same as the original. The plants have changed quite a lot. The background to the right side, that those buildings aren't really there, and then the whole skyline. So there, it creates a some kind of a map of like stuff that's closer than the background, and it's able to cut out the background very well. That's something it actually does nicely. And then yeah, it just generates all the other stuff going on, and you add a motion to it. So in this case, it's a very simple straight shot. I went and flew and did a bunch of like 20-second clips and doing a bunch of straight shots or specific turns, you know, real simple motion. Then I used a stabilizer. It's called GyroFlow, so that I put it in horizon lock so that the footage stays perfectly square, doesn't shift around as I turn. And then it's able to track that very well compared to it was really struggling to just do like normal FPV footage where you're, you know, all over the place.
Is that a post-processing program, that GyroFlow?
Yeah, it's free. It works on all platforms, and it takes gyro data plus video and a
so it
lens
takes
profile.
the black box data, huh?
So on the O3 DJI system, it's got a gyro built into the camera. So the 4K footage it can record will have gyro data, so you can stabilize. All of the other action cameras have gyro data, GoPro, RunCam, or you can actually sync up the black box data from your flight controller. But it also has optical. If you don't have a gyro, it can just do an optical stabilization, which works but not as good.
Yeah, I've been working on. I've got the Insta360 1X that I'm planning on sacrificing to the mountains when I do that long flight this summer. I lost one of those off of the same aircraft. It just fell off. I guess I didn't strap it down well enough. And I rebuilt a 1970s metal detector to work off of a lithium ion pack to go looking for it. Never did find it, but I found some cool farm equipment.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, and Cheese R&D and Helix had to drop out. So later, guys.
How are you?
But yeah, if you've got the camera there, you just, you know, GyroFlow, awesome software. It works so incredibly good.
I'll look into that because like the Insta360 does that sort of automatically, but it could use a little bit of help on the back end, and especially with like one of the things that I'd really like to do with this flight is because it's just a long straight shot. Essentially, I think it could look really nice as a as kind of a time lapse or a I forget, they have a different word for when it's like a moving time lapse.
Hyperlapse.
Hyperlapse, that's the idea, yeah. And then I've also been experimenting around with using black box data and program that I forget the name of it at the moment, but it's for guys who do who take their cars to tracks. And you can overlay things like gauges and speed and location and all that sort of thing onto your video. So it's like an OSD, but nice, much nicer. And that's been useful not only for not only does it look good, but it's super useful for like troubleshooting your aircraft and figuring out like I was reviewing some video from the last time I flew this airplane, which was a year ago, and I was like, wait a minute, if there's like an 80-second window where I had accidentally bumped the throttle up and it was getting 3 times the efficiency. So we only need 1/3 as many batteries as we thought we did for this flight. Yeah.
I've done a little bit of long range. I'd say intermediate range, you know, but about 3 miles round trip. You know, never really took it out that far. Just once I'm up there, you know, loop back and forth the mountains. And I've only lost one drone on the side of a mountain. I mean, I did the hike. I did a grid pattern, couldn't find it. You know, it just wasn't there. But that happens. Had good luck the rest of the time, though. I have a 7-inch build here that I'm working on currently. It's pretty lightweight. It's the Source One with the 7-inch dead cat arms. No action camera needed because I got the O3 air unit on there. So, records, does gyro, looks pretty decent. It's like 90% as good as a GoPro 8 or something.
Yeah, my buddy has a Recon 5-inch. He's thinking about getting the 7-inch, and I see that now they've even got a 10-inch, which is like that's how big quadcopters were when I started.
Right, it's gone full circle.
Yeah,
Except for
sure.
that thing will move at 150 miles an hour cruising.
Yeah, and he's taken his 5-inch 10 miles out and 10 miles back.
Wow.
Which is pretty wild. I have it home, and I think I'm going to bring it back with me when I come back just to work on, because our new apartment that we're moving to is on the 8th floor, and it's got great views, sight lines. That's really the issue that I've had flying around here, is there's no place where I'm like, not like I could be standing in the street and doing this, but it's technically kind of illegal. And the sight lines above, I don't have any sight lines above street level. So in the new place, having that altitude, I'll have sight lines for a good range. And so the long range vehicle that I'm looking at building is a David Veendestol tricopter, like his final model of tricopter that he built. And with the tri, you get kind of theoretically less inefficiency, I suppose, because you're running fewer motors and doing more with them, and so I'm hoping to get that running. We'll see. That theoretically should have absolutely absurd range, and the first drone that I ever built was a tricopter.
So would that be a tricopter with a servo for the back, or would it be okay? So not a Y4.
Nope. Which the problem with the Y4s is they're eating their own prop wash, and so you lose efficiency there. But the first drone that I ever built was back in 2013, maybe, and it was a tricopter, and it worked great. I had a gimbal on it that held the GoPro, but it had one too many really hard crashes, and boy, crashing tricopters sucks because it always strips the gear on the tail. And the other thing that's super weird with tricopters is that with the standard configuration where all of the motors are up on top of the arms, every time it goes to pivot that tail to produce thrust in this direction, when it initially makes that pivot, the mass of that pivot throws it in the opposite direction. So you get this initial impulse in the wrong direction, and your flight controller has to compensate for all that, and it's a major pain. But if you build it upside down so that tail rotor is underneath the rear tail, then it the initial twitch of that tail motor actually adds to the direction that it's trying to yaw in, and so there's way less hysteresis from it. So I'm not only trying to build an aircraft that's been obsolete for most of a decade, I'm trying to build it in a way that it was never intended to operate, and so that I can't see anything wrong with that.
Hey, at least you can get good metal servos now for cheap that weren't available 10 years ago.
Yeah, and you can do things like 3D print parts for the tail rotor assembly and that sort of thing. If
I've
you
seen
strip one out.
one other strange. It is a Y configuration, but it is still 4 motors. In the back, it is a V-tail.
I've seen those. Yeah, those were a thing.
I mean, it's interesting. The structure to hold that all together is really complex and looks heavy. There's a lot of parts to make that whole triangle thing and to make it all work. So I'm sure it loses all benefits that it would have.
Oh, for sure.
But
especially
I have always wanted to
you've
do
got
one.
4 motors.
Right. You still have 4, but I've always wanted to do one with the motors pitched away from each other just slightly. DJI does this on their big drones for stability because you're always pulling against itself.
Mhm.
You're not just creating lift, you're also creating drag. So you're stabilizing yourself in place.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I always thought
Yeah,
that'd be cool for a very stable platform.
all of the like the V-tails and the tricopters themselves, those were originally from a time when flight controllers just couldn't they couldn't change the speed of the motors very quickly, and so spinning up and spinning down motors for torque, that was a very sluggish process on a quadcopter, and so quadcopters tended to just not turn very well at all. And so if you had a servo controlling your yaw, or if you had multiple motors that were kind of fighting each other like that, you could get much snappier turns. You could do much closer to what we now think of as freestyle flying without worrying about the inherent slowness of your ESCs and your flight controllers. Now it's just essentially completely obsolete. And the only reason that I can think of that you would build a tricopter today, other than like the nostalgia factor, is that you can't. You're saving on one ESC. You're saving the weight on one arm, one motor. And so like you can theoretically get more efficiency out of a tricopter than you can out of something with more motors, and I'm excited to see if that's true.
Yeah, be interesting to see how it goes. Like I was considering doing the 10-inch, but the way that you used to do it, which is a really tiny motor on a shitty, tiny, lightweight frame, basically use it for efficiency only.
Mm-hmm.
People, when they're building today, they're just going for power, crazy flights. I mean, I've got a bunch of builds like that, but you go and stick like a 1404 motor with a 10-inch prop and like, oh, you're crazy. That can't possibly work. Well, it can. It just has to spin up slower, and it'll never stop spinning. The thing can't electronically brake for a prop that big, So don't try and fly under a bridge unless you give yourself enough time to, to actually come back down.
Yeah.
But I've done it before. I've had have a really old drone. It was the like Bugs something, had brushless motors. It was level flight only, but it still was pretty decent for a toy, for a cheap quad. But it had like, I don't know, there were like 1504, 1503 size motors on a 9-inch prop, and it flew fine. And the efficiency, I mean, it was a 2S 2200 milliamp battery, and I got 25 minutes of runtime. Just
That's
cruising
something
around,
that I've been,
flying around,
Yeah.
Not just
that I've been
hovering,
kind
but
of
actually
surprised
flying.
by is that the lower the cell count you use, the more efficient your ESCs are. I did some testing on that, and like, because with this long flight, I was thinking, do I want to go with like 6S? Do I want to go with like what's the optimal
Well, I think
thing
for weight,
efficiency here?
fewer cells, I think, does way less. An equivalent watt hours, because you don't have all the packaging between the cells. You don't have all the tabs.
Mm-hmm.
I think it should theoretically be less weight for the same wattage. As far as
Even if
efficiency,
you're
though, extremely high kV motors are supposed to be more efficient to a point.
I think maybe the high KV, maybe so, but like even just looking at the way that your ESC kind of functions with it, if you're running a high KV motor with a lower cell count, then you get lower speed in the motor. But after I did a bunch of testing on like a thrust meter stand with a power meter, and like, yeah, you just the 3-cell with the same 6 cells, if you have 3S 2P, you get more life out of it than you do with just 6S 1P, and
Right.
it's wild.
On the same motor, though.
On the same motor,
Right,
same
so you're
ESC,
getting-
same.
Now, did you have
Yeah.
the same lift, though? Like, did you?
For a given amount of, I think for a given amount of thrust. Now that said, you can get like,
would need a
that
higher
was with
pitch
like
prop.
the max thrust on the 3-cell, right?
Mhm.
Like that was at 100%, and to get the same amount of thrust, you were at like 25% on the 6-cell, and so that's another kind of issue that I was running into, is that this aircraft, getting it to take off is interesting because I'm using low discharge, high energy density batteries and putting as few cells in there as I can, which might be running at like 5, might be running at 6. We'll see what we ultimately go with.
Are you doing lithium ion packs for it?
Yeah. I ordered up some Sony 50Es, which are 21700s that have 5 amp hours a pop, and that's delightful.
Yeah, that's
they
good.
also have the 50Ss, which are the same, but they have a higher discharge.
The packs I've been building are Molicel, and they're 21700s, 4200 milliamp capacity, but they can discharge pretty high.
Yeah, my buddy built one of those, and I think that was what he got the 20-mile round trip, 10 mile out, 10 mile back flight on his Recon with.
I've got a 4-cell 2 parallel that I'm building right now for a buddy of mine for his airplane, for his AR wing. It fits in the space just right. The weight is actually quite low considering the capacity of it. You know, that's 8400 milliamp at 4S. So on that thing, I mean, if the math holds out, it should be able to fly for a good 45 minutes, maybe even better.
I'll show you the most cursed battery that I've ever built. This is a 6S 3P, believe it or not. It's got 2 different types of cells in it, but since they all have the same voltage curves, this guy and these 2 are one of the 6-cell batteries. And those are with the higher discharge Moly cells. And then these are with the higher energy density, lower discharge Moly cells. And what that means is that it gets, I'm moving my cursor around like you probably can't see it. But in any case, you've got 1/3 of it has high discharge cells and the other third has higher energy density cells. And that let the thing actually take off, but it still had a higher energy density. It was a terrible idea and worked perfectly.
Nice. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Higher ohm cells, it won't pull as much from them. It'll draw from the other ones. And I guess they're basically just charging themselves. They're balance charging themselves the whole time you're flying.
Yeah, since they're all hooked up in parallel, they it all evens out in the wash. So like
except for at the end, right? Cells. Because at the end of the flight, you'll have, well, I guess your batteries with more capacity are still charging the other battery. Wow, that really is a
they're not even really charging. It's just that the battery with the higher capacity isn't discharging as much as the ones with the higher capacity. The one with the higher discharge, it can't give up as much at the end. But it can give up more at the beginning, and so it helps you get off into the air. Like, it's everything in my brain is like, no, there's no way this can work. This is going to go up in a fireball, and yet it works fine.
The thing that you're flying, though, is it just too heavy?
It's a big old boy. It's an ancient 2-meter wingspan. It's a Sky Hunter. Which is an absolutely vast aircraft. And the reason that I decided to go with that one is that I crashed the AR wing that I was planning on using in a grape vineyard, and it burst into probably conservatively 24 parts.
That's pretty standard.
And so I had this other one lying around, and it's got a lot to recommend it. Number one, it's got an absolutely massive cargo bay. So you can just cram batteries in there until until you run out of money. It also has the wingspan to handle that kind of weight. And it additionally has you can put just an absurdly large propeller on there, so you don't have to turn it as quickly. And that gives you some returns on your efficiency, though. I think I've got like a 16 or a 17-inch propeller on that thing. And I didn't actually see that much of an efficiency increase from that as I'd been hoping to. But
maybe it's too much load on the, maybe it's just loading it too much.
Well, except that it's commensurately slow, and that's actually kind of an issue because running
So
that
maybe
large of a
the
propeller at 16-inch prop with a 6S battery, your cruising speed,
so you
is
might
at
just
like
be outside of
15% throttle.
yeah. So you're probably outside the efficiency band then on that motor, or for that KV at least.
It might be. I forget what KV motor I've got on there. It's it's on a different continent at the moment, so I can't exactly go look. But it's one way or another with the expected efficiencies that I'm looking at is about 2.5 watt hours per mile, and that would be enough to, with the battery pack that we're looking at, we could probably get like 72 miles of flight, which we're looking at. The minimum that we want is 36 because that's where my buddy's house is, and my buddy he lives up in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and my folks who I'll be staying with and who this is where this trailer's parked at that my background's from, they live down in the valley, and there's actually perfect line of sight the entire distance. We've both taken our 5.8 gigahertz directional antennae and gotten a 5.8 gigahertz video link over 36 miles from his place to my place. We're going to be flying
a 5-watt VTX now for FPV, like a good one, not just a cheap import one, but actually one from Foxier.
I would be interested in looking at that. I'm going to be using 1.2 gigahertz. Which I think I posted the antenna that I built for that thing to the Cyberdeck Cafe a while back. It's the giant electric green and orange helical antenna that uses a buzzsaw blade as a rear reflector.
Nice.
And we got with, I think, like 650 milliamps, we got 36 miles of range with that. Just doing ground testing. So the plan is that he's going to launch it. I've got 2 Express LRS modules that are basically clones of each other, so they can both control the same receiver as long as they're not hooked up at the same time. So he's going to launch it from up at his place, and then it has a 5.8 gigahertz transmitter on board that he'll be using to control it for the takeoff. And once I pick it up with the 1.2 gigahertz transmitter, it'll do autopilot for most of the way down. But
for ELRS, they do have a function now, so you can have 2 controllers bound at the same time, so you can do handover.
That's awfully interesting. I'm always a little bit hesitant. It's been probably a year and a half since I've updated my my firmware on my modules. And I'm always hesitant to be like, yeah, we're going to do this flight right after we update all of the firmware. And then a week and a half later, you're like, okay, I've tracked down most of the bugs.
You definitely want to, test those features out. But TBS added that for Crossfire, the handover, so that you could do a flight like up a hill and have someone on the other side to take over. And then ELRS released that feature like the next day in response to it.
Fantastic.
But it's been out for like I think it's been out about a year now, so it it's probably stable. Could be interesting.
The other thing that I was kind of waiting with for bated breath last time I was looking at updating my firmware was the ability to increase and decrease the signal strength proportionate to basically like have it running low when the aircraft is nearby, and then increase the power output as it gets further away based on
for your
signal strength telemetry for your transmitter. No, not for VTX. For the control TX.
Why not just run it at 1 watt all the time?
A couple of reasons. Heat dissipation. Like I'm running. This is a FrSky module. Probably can't see it. It says Pigeon Cooker on there because it does get up to a pretty good clip.
They've got, they have automatic, it can change the power for you based on telemetry. But
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
For me, like new. When I get around, an obstacle that is actually blocking the signal, it's already lost connection before the telemetry tells me it's lost connection. So it's you have to have a really high telemetry link speed to make it. But you're doing a long range, a slow long.
I'm doing
flight.
long
That's
range,
not
clear
gonna matter.
sky.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's the different type of flying. And the other thing is that a lot of this stuff, you know, I'm carrying my stuff out. Like I think we're looking at a 12-mile hike out into the backcountry coming up here, and so you don't want to carry a lot of batteries with you, and so anything that saves battery is useful on those types of missions.
We got Aeon asking if the thing's got auto launch.
Oh, yes, yeah, it does have auto launch, which makes it easier because it's got to weigh. I mean, it weighs a bunch when you're launching it, and so fiddling with your controller in one hand while trying to toss it in the other hand, especially since it's a pusher prop, and a 17-inch pusher prop has I've got scars from getting my fingers hit by smaller propellers than that. But yeah, it should be an interesting project. And while I think the FAA and FCC would probably both take exception with me posting videos of it to YouTube, maybe I'll share it with the Cyberdeck Cafe Discord.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll have all the licensing required for this flight.
I do have at least some of the licensing, and for the sake of covering my butt, it's entirely possible that it'll never get off the ground. And
well, besides, you'll have line of sight of it the whole time when you're following it in a car underneath of it. So it's
we actually thought about that, and we have done that along a very similar route. And flying FPV in the passenger seat of a car is one of the most disorienting. Well,
you did say it's going to be on autopilot for most of the flight, though, right? So really,
this one is going to be this.
You
this
only
one
have to be. You only have to be in line of sight. You don't have to be in the goggles.
The hard part is a lot of it is like weaving up and down through canyons. It would be difficult to keep line of sight even if you were following it. There's just no roads.
If you were going to actually attempt that, though, I would say a monitor mounted in the car versus the goggles. I can fly on a monitor in all kinds of circumstances, where on the goggles it will make me nauseous.
Well, you know, when I was working, when I interviewed for that job, sitting in the backseat of a helicopter and watching a screen all day, one of the primary qualifications that I had for that was that I don't get motion sick. So that is a help there. I have flown from the passenger seat of a car before, and it's like your eyeballs and your inner ear are having a fight.
Yeah, that I've tried it. It's not fun.
It's quite interesting. Listen, I got to get going before too long here, but it's been really great,
time to wrap it up.
Great talking with you. And maybe I'll post some fun videos of the stuff that I get up to over the summer between the off-grid stuff and the FPV stuff. It should be a great time.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see what you come up with. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Later on.
Talk to you later.
And for everyone out there in the Matrix, have a good night.